Were you really sick this week? What was the problem?
I broke my back.
What do you mean by that?
My back is broken.
What, a vertebrae or what portion?
Spinal.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another week of Muskies on Tap, bringing to you episode 70 here, coming off of a extended weekend, Labor Day weekend. Hopefully everybody got out and enjoyed the weather that we had. It wasn't too hot and it wasn't, too cold. Good amount of warmth up here in the North Woods, a lot of sunshine. I know we did a lot of our activities for our fantasy football league. We had that full weekend. Brian and Max were up. We did a little bit of fishing. We'll get into that a little bit here. We had one particularly large catch for one of the guys here tonight, so we'll touch on that, no doubt. So let's get into it. Let's introduce the other guys on here, and let's start with none other than my brother, Max. How you doing tonight, Max?
Doing good. Excited to be here, man. What's summer is coming to an end. I know we still got extended forecast is looking like there's still some warm weather here coming up in the next few weeks, but we've had some chilly mornings, even seen some trees start to turn. We got football season right around the corner. Things are looking up for the fall season. So excited for that as always. I think this time of year is always a good kind of transition period that I always look forward to. I mean, fall fishing is definitely some of my favorite time to be on the water. Just exist in the Midwest in general. It's one of those seasons I just wish was much longer than it actually is. I mean, you typically get a handful of really solid, great weather weeks in the fall, and sometimes it can be brutal, whether it's too hot or way too cold, but there's always that happy medium where if you get lucky on a certain weekend, you can just pure bliss out there. But yeah, Packers play Friday night. Looking forward to that season opener out in Brazil. I don't know what's gonna all go down out there. But yeah, had a really fun weekend up north with you guys. Fantasy draft weekend never disappoints. A lot of tomfoolery going around. We're able to fish, as Gus alluded to, and also alluded to the one big catch that our other co-host who's joining us here tonight, Brian Eccles, sorry, was able to wrangle in, and he ended up sticking a giant Northwoods, Wisconsin muskie. But at what cost, Brian? What did it cost you?
Well, we can dive right in, I guess. Happy to be here and break this down. Yeah, I've done a lot of thinking over the last few days of, at what point was that fish worth it? But I mean, yeah, I can't, I'm lucky enough to have caught the fish. That's like, I don't know, what would you say? You catch a fish like that maybe once every couple years in the northern woods of Wisconsin.
I mean, I think for us weekend dish warriors, yeah, I mean, you don't stumble across fish of that caliber too often, especially on a high bluebird post frontal day with really not much going on, with only
Yeah,
a few hours to fish.
yeah, yeah. I met up with you guys that afternoon, and I was just planning on coming out for a few hours. And yeah, bluebird skies. It kind of felt like humidity from the day prior was gone. It felt like a little bit of a cold front coming in. It just did not feel like you were gonna see anything, and we didn't. For the first 2.5 hours, at least from when I was on the boat. You guys were fishing earlier than that and didn't see anything. So it was slow. We knew that. We had caught a couple pike, which is never a great sign. Um, and I kind of did what I was thinking, like my thought process when we were fishing that our musky bender a few weeks ago, and it just kind of felt like on that last day that the humidity left and that the fish were going to be a little negative. We've heard from people in the past too to throw a spinner bait. Like you might think pull pause, spinner bait's still a great option, and that's what moved the fish that Max eventually caught that weekend, his big fish, but I moved it on a spinner bait. So I went back to that. Shout out Big O, his spinner bait,
Shout out.
black with I
Shout
think
out.
chartreuse and orange blade on it, if I'm
Yep.
correct.
Mhm.
And yeah, it wasn't too long after clipping that on. We were fishing kind of a weed edge that led right up kind of adjacent to a small deep hole. I don't know, maybe 20 yard by 20 yard little hole that went down 10 feet from all the other structure in the area. And it was pretty much sitting, up on the 10-foot flat right above the hole. And yeah, got rocked like 20 feet out from the boat. And right as I set the hook, it gave one of its big head shakes, and then it kind of came at me with its mouth wide open, gliding through the top of the water. And I was like, oh my God, this is a big fish. I think around then, Max, you were next to me. I think you saw it kind of coming at the boat with its mouth open, full head showing us. And yeah, it was a big fish, and started to kind of panic, especially once everybody else saw it and everybody else started going, oh my God. And it was so unexpected, and it was a single hook spinnerbait. This time, I'm like, I had problems over the bender week with not sharpening hooks. This time I sharpened it.
Nice.
But it's still not a ton
Good
of
work.
confidence with a single hook. And sure enough, it like dove kind of across the trolling motor to the right side of the boat. And Gus was over there with the net. And it was still digging pretty hard, but I wanted to try and net this fish as soon as possible. I did not want it to, pull me under the boat or bring me around to the other side of the boat again. Like I just did not trust a single hook. So I kind of horse it into the net. And like right as its mouth clears the net, the bucktail goes flying into the back of the net. About half the fish is leaning over the front of the net. And I started yelling like at Gus. I'm like, Gus, come on, Gus. Everybody else is starting to yell, and like half the fish flops into the net and just somehow slides right in. So good net job, Gus. We got a little lucky on a few fronts there, but yeah, at the end of the day,
No
we got it
problem. No
done.
problem. Yeah, we got them all right. That was a quick series of events that all happened in, God, I don't know, 15, 20 seconds or something. Max's our buddy Jason was in the boat as well, and I think he at the time wasn't fishing because we were just going 3 wide. We weren't doing 4 wide, I don't think, and he was able to get on his phone fast enough. We didn't have any cameras running, but he was able to start the film on his phone, and that's how we got to find out that as the fish was just about to go into the bag, it did a like a tumble turn. It did like a full gator roll and spit the lure like as it was going in, and that thing couldn't have slid in any more perfectly somehow into the net. So I definitely got lucky on that one. Really, really happy we got that fish in the bag, because I know we discussed like if it got off, we were probably going to be thinking some pretty
Oh
crazy
yeah, it
things by
was.
the weight of that fish, the girth alone, and just the stockiness of this fish was actually quite impressive. I don't know if I've ever seen an August fish built quite like that, especially at that length. Maybe that one from the Musky Open a couple of years ago is
Yeah.
comparable, but still not this caliber. It's, not the same length and everything like that. But yeah, we got lucky. Shout out Big O. That spinnerbait just straight up gets big fish going. We haven't used it like a ton, not as much as I really would like to, and now I'm going to use the, absolute shit out of it. But it is only hooked big fish. It holds my PB pike at 43 inches. Max lost that giant on Vermilion, and then Brian caught this Northwoods giant, and that's its track record right now, which is pretty impressive.
Absolute beluga. That
Yeah,
was
it was wide. It was probably like the widest fish at least I've seen or I've been in the boat for. I mean, that's what scared me. All of a sudden, I bring it in, I realized how wide this thing is, and I immediately started thinking scary numbers in my head.
Yeah, she shrunk a little bit. She went 47, but I think she is without a doubt we can probably consider your PB, Brian, even though it's short
Yeah,
of your one from last year, but the weight is probably at minimum 6, 7 pounds heavier, maybe
yeah,
more.
it was a well-fed fish, and I don't know if this is what caused my problems for the rest of the weekend, but I've had some back problems leading up to this. Nothing too severe, nothing I really worried about. Maybe I should
Still
have,
huck.
but
Still could huck.
yeah, yeah. I've been fine. I've been golfing. It's whatever. Just wake up a little sore, get over it. But I released this fish, and it's so awkward, trying to like hold this fish over the gunnel and lean over and set it in the water. And I think I made a comment at some point after we released it that I'm like, God, that really wrenches on your back. But I was fine, like kept fishing. We went home fine for a few hours, and I don't know what events led to it, but I just reached down later that night around dinner to pick something up, and my back just like locked up and shot pain. And I'm like, oh man, this is weird. I've never felt this. And I kept bending over. I'm like, oh my God, I can't do anything. And it probably kept getting worse for the next 24 hours. I couldn't golf. I couldn't even get out of bed the next couple mornings. So it's gotten a little bit better now, but yeah, I mean, at what price? It kind of botched a lot of my plans for the weekend. Still had a great time and dealt with a lot of pain, but at least I didn't do it on like a 36 incher or something. At least I got something to be happy about looking back.
That was wild, man. Came back from golf. You got like electroshock therapy going on. You're just sitting in the hot tub soaking for 2 hours. And I mean, watching you try to put your freaking socks on that next morning was a tough scene. I felt terrible for
Oh,
you.
yeah.
As bad as you can feel for a guy that just caught a fish like that. But that was wild, man. I mean, full full back injury from catching a muskie.
Yeah.
It's real, folks. It's real.
It's real. You better get your off-season workouts in.
All right. Well, we'll maybe talk about that a little bit after the interview here. We got Mike Kramer coming on from Kramer Bros Tackle. Really excited to chat with him here this evening. So hopefully you guys enjoy.
All right, here on the line we got Mike Kramer from Kramer Brothers Tackle, makers of the woodtick, Revolution bucktail, all those good baits, and we're gonna dive right in here tonight and get the full background and all the lure making and all the fishing that you've done, Mike. So how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Thanks, guys, for having me on. I was pretty excited when you guys asked me to be on. I always like talking muskies with cool dudes. So, yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, no problem. We were just chatting before we actually started recording here, and I was applauding you for making that wood tick bait. I don't know if you need me to cut you a check or what from our PMTT winnings, because I think you're solely responsible for us bagging that first fish. We had a little bit of a running joke going on when, we were fishing some of our spots. They were obviously spots that some other people were hitting, and we'd watch a boat go through and it'd be like, oh shit, like boat just went through. We probably shouldn't fish it. And then we would joke and be like, well, do they have a wood tick on? Because we just felt like we found a little magic that one of the days pre-fishing, we were trying to find baits that were going to get bid out on Tonka, some very highly pressured waters. And I asked Gus, I'm like, you still got that wood tick laying around? He's like, sure enough, I brought it. I tied it on, and I think my first 3 to 5 casts is when I hooked into the very, very large fish that I unfortunately dumped at the boat. But it was just pre-fishing. And anyways, I put it on ice until the tournament, and first morning came around on Friday and it got it done again on a spot that we watched probably 3 to 4 other boats fish through prior to us going on it. So I kind of wanted to start there. The wood tick. What got you thinking about hanging some metal off of in front of a bucktail?
Yeah. So, if for guys that aren't familiar with like my Revolution blade, in 2016, I came out with the Revolution blade, which is a one-piece kind of design. But basically what I wanted to do is kind of like simplify a double-bladed bucktail that is kind of always in the open position and starts as soon as it hits the water. So I came out with that in 2016 in 3 different sizes, the 7, 9, and the 11. And in about 2018, we started putting the ticker pins in front of the blade, so it would bang on it when it would spin. And then, yeah, a few years ago too, we came out with our answer to like a shallow subsurface, almost like a topwater. If you really want to slow that your revolution down, it's got to be a little more buoyant. So just you can creep it along shallow cover, even when there's surface weeds. And I mean, even if I took my Kramer Bros hat off, the woodtick is probably one of the easiest baits to fish for anybody. And then good fishermen understand it right away when they fish it too, that you can just slow things down up in shallow water. It's super weedless, within reason. And yeah, fish are kind of going crazy for them. It's kind of it's been happening lately, especially with the cool down. So
Oh God,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, all the fish are sliding up shallow, and that thing is definitely going to be a deadly weapon. We haven't really used it much in northern Wisconsin, but I'm pretty excited. I don't know if do you hear much of people over in Wisconsin using them a whole bunch? I know you're over in Minnesota, and that's very you know, common thing that people do use, even though it seemed like nobody was throwing it during Tonka. But I'm curious if you've heard enough over in Wisconsin that your neighboring state fish like it or not.
yeah, I've been actually getting a decent amount of reports of guys throwing our number sevens, just our regular weighted ones, on some deeper stuff too. And then the baby wood ticks have really shined so far since they came out with those this spring, which is smaller version with the number 7 blade, a little bit smaller hook, just a smaller profile and everything. Yeah, I get quite a bit of reports from Wisconsin, I would say, especially in the last few weeks too, once the water started dipping down a little bit too. A couple of years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, a guy won the PMTT championship on a wood tick on Pewaukee Lake. I think he caught
Oh, good.
three
Oh,
with
that's
a
right.
yeah. Robert Hulleman, I think that's how you pronounce his last name. He's a Metro guy, part of the Muskies Inc. That Metro guy, or I think the Twin Cities chapter. I think what it is, but yeah, it's been happening over there too. I mean, Minnesota, of course, is home for me, and I think it's a little bit more of a bucktail orientated state versus Wisconsin. But yeah, we're still crushing fish over there too.
So we kind of put the cart a little bit before the horse here, diving right into the bucktail stuff. I mean, this would be a little bit of a loaded question, but it's obviously, you're in Minnesota now. Is that where things began for you? And then kind of take us up from the start on how you got hooked on musky fishing and all the way up to kind of when Kramer Bros Tackle started out.
Yeah. Oh man, it depends on how much time you got. I can get kind of long-winded with that kind of stuff too, because I'm just obviously thinking of it as I go. But so, yeah, my backstory in a nutshell. I've been fishing muskie since about 1998. I caught my first muskie on the Little Fork River, which is a northern Minnesota river, which is a tributary to the Rainy. Little Fork, Big Fork, cool backwoods, hard to fish unless you're used to river fishing. That's where I kind of cut my teeth musky fishing at first. And then, so I live in Moorhead, Minnesota, and the closest area lakes, which I call home, are the Detroit Lakes area. And that would be mostly like Pelican, Big Detroit, basically the Pelican River chain, Bemidji area as well. And then I spent a ton of time up on Lake of the Woods too, and in the summer and the fall too. So, yeah, and so in 2011, I started my own bucktail company, and that was some double-bladed bucktails that I still make today. But what kind of put Kramer Bros on the map was our use of reflective material on spinner blades, and it's basically the most reflective material on the planet. We're kind of the first guys to start putting it on anything fishing, and that kind of put us on the map. And we did our first YouTube video was filmed with a GoPro Hero 1, I think in 2011. So it was like
Nice.
stuff compiled in 2010 and some in 11. And it kind of shook the musky world up a little bit. I don't know if you guys were around or you remember that, but it's kind of a big deal. And then it just kind of took off from there. And I started guiding in about 2012 in the Detroit Lake area, and then just kind of took off from there. And 2016 kind of invented the Revolution blade, and it's been kind of nuts ever since. So here we are in 2024. I've been at it for quite some time now. So musky fishing and making baits and guiding is a way of life for me now. So
Right on.
What's kind of your setup in your warehouse or creation lab when you're making these things? Have you had to expand it over the years? And then kind of what's the process of creating these wood ticks?
yeah, so I mean, basically, the key to that stuff is aligning yourself with the right people who know how to do things, and hiring the right people to help put things into production, because if you want to make a lot of something, you have to let some of the work go, and you have to find people who are better at you than doing certain, or better at you at doing certain tasks, such as manufacturing a certain part or painting or assembly or things like that. So yeah, I mean, basically it started in my basement, actually my apartment before. Yeah, it was like it started to take over my whole apartment, and then I got married, and then it took over my basement, and then I had our separate house. That's where I was working until we sold that house, and now my shop is in the basement of our house too. So I have people that help and do tasks in town that help build, and then I have some manufacturing companies helping me do some tasks and things like that. So yeah, it's not like a big factory or anything like that. It's probably a huge misconception. If everybody saw what my shop looked like, they'd be like, "You make your baits down there, huh?" And it's like, yeah, I mean, you don't need a ton of room, but we're working on a shop right now, actually. It's probably going to happen within a year. So, but for now, I mean, yeah, I'm a father, a basketball coach, a baseball coach. So I kind of got to be home. So it's nice to have my shop in the basement, and so I'm readily available for everybody, too. So
Yeah. Sounds like you keep fairly busy then. I got to know what did that apartment look like, making baits out of a apartment where you cleared treble hooks off your bed before you went to sleep, or what was going
oh,
on
dude,
there?
it was bad. It was bad. Well, it was a one bedroom, so in a ground level or whatever. But my wife's like, "This is not happening if I'm moving in here." That's when we got married, before we bought our house, because it's a bunch of plastic tables, and pretty much turned the whole apartment into a musky shop, you know. So, but you never have enough room or storage, and I ran out of it. That's for sure. So.
I know that all too well. That happens quick for me. I have accumulated many lures now, and I make a few bucktails myself. And any
Well,
desk space that I've ever seen in the past multiple years is just covered. I'll find something to just chuck on it. That there's always no space left and needing of more boxes and totes and all
yeah.
that. But you
When it
said
comes
so.
to,
Oh,
oh,
go
sorry
ahead.
to cut you off. When it comes to all that stuff too, I have trouble throwing everything away. So like, you never
Right.
know. You might be like, dude, I might need that someday. You never know. So I just have like totes and boxes full of crap. When I die, everyone's gonna be like, what in the hell was he doing with all this stuff? So they're gonna have to
So
get rid of it somehow.
yeah. So with the so in 2016 you said the wood tick, or was that the year you said the ticking blades came about, like where you, or was that the revolution? I'm
So
sorry,
in general, in 2016,
that was the
it would
revolution.
it'd be the Revolution blades, yep,
Hmm.
which was pretty nuts. And then I think it was like a couple of years later, we are always trying to think of a way to get more sound out of it and have it banging on something, and we finally came up with the right formula for that, and I guess kind of brought that out. And then the wood tick was just kind of adding a wood body just for more buoyancy and so you could cast it just as far as like top water and cover a lot of shallow water like it does. And just kind of streamline that thing, I guess. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and
So
we always got new stuff in the works right now too. So it's
yeah,
always, the
Nice.
wheels are always turning there.
that's good. Yeah, there's always ways to make new lures and find new sounds for these fish to hear, because that's kind of the key. You got to have like a whole wide variety, and double tens aren't going to catch fish every day, or single eights aren't going to catch fish every day. Um, but what I was going to joke around was with the ticking blades is because I know when I've snipped bucktails, once you tie the line tie part and you snip the excess like bucktail wire, is that maybe where that did you save some of those and keep those around to make the ticking blades up front, or did you kind of how did that idea come about other than just having the revolution make more sound?
So the revolution blade, as soon as it hits the water and you start pulling it forward, no matter what speed, it starts spinning like crazy. And my buddy and I, who also guides, Ryan McMahon, him and I were always talking about a way to get some good sound out of the thing, or have it maybe like ratcheted below it or something. And man, you should see my bone pile of stuff where I was um, trying to get the right sound and not have the bait roll. Like I started out just using that tag end of the bucktail. When you tie your finished loop, there's a tag end that you have to cut off.
Mhm.
And I had that bent and I had that hitting the blade, but since that in itself was connected to the front loop, it was kind of making the entire bait roll. And some might accept that, but I didn't. So I just needed to have, I was trying to figure out a way to have it kind of some free floating pins that didn't have anything to do with the main shaft. So it wouldn't ruin any of the integrity of the way the thing ran. And yeah, just playing around with the bucktail wires and finding the right distance from the end loop to the blade and getting it to hit the blade in the right spot for the right sound. It was actually a lot simpler than I thought it was going to be, which is cool too. So usually good ideas are the most simple things, not real technical or not most of the best ideas on things are simple and just true running type of baits,
Right. Yeah. So, I'm curious to talk to you about this because I feel like it's still an area that Gus and I have not, Gus Brand and I have not fished in and really just kind of heard about it. We've now spent a little bit of time in the metro. We were fortunate enough to get to Vermilion last year during the PMTT. I mean, Minnesota is still kind of I would say, a little bit foreign to us in a lot of ways, but I would say particularly the western side of Minnesota is something we just really have not dabbled in. So, starting out, I guess being at your home waters now, I mean, what's the kind of state of those fisheries? I feel like I've kind of heard mixed results from some people, but you never really know, taking stuff at face value. I mean, I always just think of big, deep, clear systems out that way, but is it more complex? Is it different? I mean, what's going on out there?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously the Detroit Lakes area, it has been home and all over Minnesota. But yeah, when people say Western Minnesota, I think a lot of them they're talking about probably Detroit Lakes, Pelican, Miltona, West Battle, all those lakes that are kind of over in this direction. I fish all those. Yeah, they're moderately sized. A lot of them are like 2 to 6,000 acres or so. Also, yeah, deep, super clear water, especially with the zebra mussels. Deep weed lines, cabbage beds, rocks, pretty much everything. River systems, you name it. And yeah, it's really transitioned into an open water thing in the spring now that the water is cleared up. A lot of them are, Cisco or Tulubi based lakes, fishing open water until, the water usually gets too hot for a little while for us to fish, or else kind of pushes fish into the thermocline and they don't like to come out of it really. And then once it starts to cool down, like late August and September, then there's usually a big shallow water push, where all those open water fish are coming up onto shallow water, or showing up on structure and stuff like that too. And yeah, I mean, what right now, as far as status of the fishery goes, it's had its peaks, and I think we're in a valley a little bit right now, with numbers of fish. There's still a lot of big fish, but it's a lot different than it used to be back in, say, 2008 to 2012 or something like that.
Mhm.
Still exceptionally good, but things have come back down to earth a little bit, I think. And a lot of times we're not getting as many follows as we used to get. You're kind of fishing memories, or the feeding windows, I feel like, are actually really short. I think it partially could be because of some fishing pressure, but a lot of it, I think, has to do with there being so much bait. And if these fish, if the feeding window opens and these fish decide to bite, they get their fill pretty dang quick.
Right.
And I mean, you just hope to get a few of those real juicy days where they're biting like crazy all day, but kind of predicting the feeding window and fishing it correctly, and knowing where to be at the right time when that opens, and it is kind of the key to stacking a bunch of fish up nowadays. You got to be really efficient with it,
Mhm. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, for us, like obviously being in Wisconsin, to come over to Minnesota and fish. I mean, I live here in the cities, but I don't currently have a boat. So most of my fishing's done in northern Wisconsin. And, I think the few times we've been able to get over here, it's just, we're still just astounded by the size of these Leech Lakes trained muskies, and
Yeah.
just kind of how different they are. I mean, I would imagine that the Western Minnesota, from what we heard, is damn near the same. I mean, I'm sure you probably have some pretty crazy stories. You talk about peaks and valleys. Like when those lakes were at their peak, I mean, what was going on then? I mean, was it was it just dumb, or was it, you still had to work for them? I mean, was it just the size or the amount of bites per day? I mean, what made it so different?
I mean, I'm gonna sound like one of these like back in the day guys, right? Because now, well, I'm 40 years old. I've been, like I say, I've been musky fishing since about 1998. I'm not a newcomer anymore, right? But
Mhm.
like when that's what it used to be like versus what it is now, they're just pretty blown away, you know. We did hit a really good peak in Minnesota, and obviously I'm super thankful for that. And like I said, things have kind of come back down to earth, but they're still good. But yeah, I mean, there was a time period there where, if you knew how to look at a lake map after GPS came out, and you kind of could pick apart the structure, fish points, inside corners, and knew the lake, you were able to stack some fish up, and I mean, they were bitey, and and that was the introduction of all the newer type of baits like cowgirls and stuff like that too, and some of the newer top waters, and obviously the stuff that we came out with too. We hit it at the right time to be coming out with some cool baits, you know.
Right. Do you remember that first
For
fish you caught
example,
on Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
like my best night in this area was 14 hours of fishing. We caught 13 fish, with 7 over 50,
Jesus.
with the biggest being a 54 and a quarter, and we lost 6 that were probably, at least half of them were over 50.
That's
And
ridiculous.
that's exceptionally crazy. I'll never see anything like that, in my life again. But there was a lot of times where a guy was, you go out, catch four, at least one or two of them was over 50 inches. And like the reality of going out on a juicy day and getting 10 bites was not out of the question, and night fishing was crazy. It still is good, but I just do it less. But yeah, I mean, it used to be pretty crazy around here, and it's like I say, it's still good, but I could talk all day about the heydays, the big fish that we've encountered, and all that stuff. So yeah, and I love talking about it.
For sure. I mean, yeah, we can always for sure get into another story or 3 or 6, but one thing I do want to ask before we go further about that area, and forgive my ignorance, I would assume they've always been there. And if so, did they start up some sort of like stocking program as well, where there was like a new wave of all these fish and growing at really fast rates? Kind of like how, I don't know, we've talked to a few people about like the Mille Lacs heyday and the perfect storm where the cowgirl came out and all those fish were big and there was a ton of them. Was that kind of similar for Detroit Lakes? Was Minnesota DNR like, was it just kind of how the state went, where they stocked kind of everywhere at once? Or how has Detroit Lakes kind of gone about?
Yeah, I might be talking a little bit out of school, but I'll probably be pretty accurate. I think the first year, so the Pelican River chain might have had muskies way back in the day, but that's not 100% confirmed. But the first year, I think that the Minnesota DNR started stocking the Leech Lake strain, which is native to the Mississippi drainage system, in 1988, I think, was the first year. And we caught our first 50-inch muskie out on Detroit Lakes in the year 2000. So that probably would have been, around one of the first year class stockers. And those fish were super heavy, obviously, because they got first pickings on the bait, right? But yeah, most of the lakes that I fish are not, don't have a native population, with the exception of like Bemidji, and some of those lakes hooked to the Mississippi River, as well as like the Schoolcraft River, and those have natural muskies. But the lakes around here, like Pelican and Detroit, it's all supplemental stocking with the efforts of like the FM Muskies Inc. has a lot to do with getting those fish put in these lakes. And of course, the cooperation of the Minnesota DNR too. So, and I don't exactly know the stocking numbers, but they were pumping a lot of them in there, and they were taking really well. That's for sure.
Like a fish per acre, or give or take?
Oh man,
less?
I think they were stocked at a rate of trying to get one fish per acre. I remember reading that about like Pelican, which is like a 4,000 acre lake. I don't think that was ever acquired, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
So when they were going nuts in this heyday, I mean, what were you guys smacking them on? I mean, was it just dealer's choice, or was there certain patterns that just went nuts for you guys at certain times of the year, that you guys kind of stumbled into or invented yourselves, that you're just like, man, we feel like absolute geniuses right now catching 650 inchers in one day?
Well, the beginning. So when I first started muskie fishing, there was no such thing as GPS. And I mean, we pretty much had, and it was walleye fishing and bass and pike fishing before that, but pretty much just had the old school, like Sportsman's Connection paper maps. And you would pretty much just look at those maps, and they were pretty vanilla. I mean, they were in like 5-footers, but they weren't 100% accurate like what you're seeing from Lake Masters and Navionics now. But you pretty much had to just look at that map and try to triangulate once you found a spot out there, and line up this dock and line up that pontoon, and there's usually a point here. And a lot of those spots that I found on Pelican and Big Detroit were from trolling Rad Dog spinner baits. and just kind of, and that was before double bladed bucktails or anything like that. And we trolled rad dog spinnerbaits, and you just kind of play touch and go with the weed edge or up on top of it, looking at the paper map and trying to line things up. And then, after so long, you kind of get a feel for it. You know how the structure is laid out. If there's a little bit of a bump out here or there, it's amazing this produce. Like when Lake Masters came through and started mapping some of these lakes out in 1-footers, started looking at the GPS, and all those spots started to really make sense.
Right.
Whether it be like a food shelf or a sunken hump or a piece of irregularity on a structure, like a little bit of a bump out or an inside corner or steep edge where a steep edge meets like a gradual break line or something like that. And it actually kind of aggravated me a little bit, because then people started putting the puzzle together a little faster than they used to, because all those spots were pretty sacred. And then once the map came out, any clown could just look at it and go over and fish it, once it started to figure out what was working, how to zoom out of the map and duplicate spots that are hitting. But yeah.
That's like,
Yeah, that's
I
nice.
remember
So to get back to
go ahead.
to your question, to get back to your question, like with baits and, basically for us, it started out like crankbaits, rad dog spinnerbaits, bulldogs, old school inhalers, stuff like that. And then, double bladed bucktails came out. And then before you know it, I was kind of coming out with my own stuff, and you just kind of follow the pattern and, network with the right guys. And the group was usually smaller than it is now, because there was no such thing as all these patterns being exposed on the internet and YouTube and stuff like that. So a lot of that stuff was a lot more secret than it is now, and it helped us. It helped us catch a lot more fish, I think, versus spread out some of the catches.
Yeah, no, what you just said there is really interesting. I mean, obviously, we run a podcast, we talk about musky fishing and whatnot, but like I do think the amount of information that's out there these days is pretty nuts, because it does feel like with the technology side of things, you really can break down a body of water fairly quickly. And like, I mean, even I remember, granted that these things probably existed, like navionics and stuff, but when we started musky fishing, we didn't know about any of that. And like, there was a spot on the Eagle River chain that we used to mark and fish, because there was a nice extended bar and point. Hey, how you doing? Little celebrity appearance. And
She's gonna catch a muskie this year first. She's got to. My two boys have caught muskies, but
hell yeah,
she's gonna catch
Next.
hell yeah, she's up next. But yeah, we used to mark the spot, because there was a slide on the we call it the slide bar, and there was a slide that extended into the water, and that was like, as long as you were looking at the slide, you knew you were on the middle of the bar. And it's just kind of funny to think back, like now we can run that spot perfectly right on the edge with our side imaging and whatnot. But like back in the day when we started, we'd fish that spot religiously because there's always fish on it. And it was like, oh, as long as we can see that slide, we know that we're in the money zone still. We had no clue where it ended. We probably cut that drift off 30 feet short or whatever, but we had 2D, I think, at the time. So we could at least kind of tell where, the weeds were, if we were on them or off of them. But yeah, no, it's just kind of funny to think back and hear these stories. So that's cool though. You guys kind of stumbled across that. Were you running with like a crew of guys that were just as obsessed with you were about it back in the day, or?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, obviously when you're obsessed with something, you usually try to line yourself up with the right people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like I say, it was different without the internet. I have met a lot of cool people because of the internet. But, back in the day, you kept your circle kind of smaller and shared patterns with people that are willing to give some information as well.
Sure.
Like a good friend of mine, he's an old timer. He taught me a lot about musky fishing. His name is Raleigh Olson. He's got to be in his 80s now. but him and I met at the Access at Big Detroit, and that guy, I mean, if he pioneered a lot of the patterns that you and I still use today, you know, him and some of his colleagues back in the day, like on Mille Lacs and all that stuff. But he always said, you know, when somebody gives you a spot, it's not your spot to give to somebody else.
Right.
And that was a conversation that him and I had when we started fishing together. And it totally makes sense. And, you know, that's why I say, like, keep your circle, you know, close and stuff like that. And you learn from each other. Yeah. I was able to meet a lot of cool people back in the day and today, involved in musky fishing. Yeah. If I think back to all the patterns and the things that we shared with each other, I mean, a lot of that stuff I feel like we were paving the way for the stuff that everyone still uses nowadays too. Live bait fishing was a big thing that we started doing a long time ago too, and it's a lot of those patterns still hold the same, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, we heard that live bait fishing out by you was just insane for a stretch of time, and still is really good. But do you remember like you talk about stumbling on these patterns back in the day? I mean, was there any one that really struck you as weird when you first started to do it, whether it was like trolling spinner baits or throwing rubber or something that you're just like, this will in no way, shape, or form work, and then all of a sudden, boom, you start lighting fish up and it becomes a staple in your, toolkit.
Something that really sticks out to me obviously was oh man, I could think of a lot of things, but one of them that I'll just touch on briefly is figuring out the open water bite, because nowadays everyone's like, open water is happening in the spring,
Right.
especially in Minnesota. And it's not a secret, you know, especially with the live scope stuff and everything. I mean, you know, the fish are there. But some of the basins that are used to be and still are packed full of tullibees and stuff, it was crazy how we figured that out. Just seeing fish porpoise out in open water, or else seeing them, you know, basically blasting tullibees out of the water and stuff like that. And then, you know, we're throwing, you know, pounders or whatever, mostly big rubber, out in open water, you know, over 60, 70 feet of water, and catching fish that are like 5 to 10 feet down. And that was something that really, really was crazy to me, because I had never really been an open water fisherman, you know, for walleyes or bass or pike or anything. And then, you know, you catch a 54-incher in the middle of nowhere, not even near any structural element within 500 yards of you, you know. It's pretty crazy to see a fish like that come up and eat boat side when you're in 70 feet of water and you had no idea they were there, except for the fact that, you know, you could see bait everywhere and stuff like that, and had kind of an idea. But once we started to put some of those things together on some of these lakes, man, it was pretty crazy. It was pretty nuts. So, but yeah, and you know, the night fishing thing was a huge deal, and still is. And then starting to figure out some of the things that actually make these fish bite, like the moonrise, moonset directly overhead, underfoot, and actually starting to learn that was you know, some of the ways to predict when to be in the right spot at the right time. I used to network with some guys that kind of taught me about some of that stuff right away when they were talking about a lot, like Andy Ham and John Hoyer. I don't know if you know those guys, but they're Metro fishermen who are kind of my age and started musky fishing around the same time. And those guys were talking about that moon stuff on Vermilion, and how they were paying attention to it and sticking fish, and, you know, going back to a big fish that they saw at moonrise and catching it on the rock that they moved it on 3 hours before when it was less active. And it started to make a lot of sense to me too. And yeah, I would say that's probably one of the biggest predictors for, you know, being in the right spot at the right time, if you're able to be there. That along with, you know, low pressure or some weather moving in. type of thing too. So those patterns really were something that seemed like a bit of an enigma, but as soon as it started happening all the time, it's kind of like, okay, there is something to this, you know.
I could only imagine the look on your guys' face the first, giant fish you guys get over open water, 70 feet, just throwing whatever, out in the middle of the abyss and being like, holy shit, this just worked. Like, yeah, it would have to be a crazy feeling. I mean, because like for us, we kind of adopted a lot of those techniques through some of the things that you're talking about, like through watching, YouTube, listening to other podcasts, and then going out and having to execute and do it. I mean, obviously there's that component too, but to actually be part of the forefront of like trying these things out before there's that much history on it, I could imagine that would have been pretty crazy. Just thinking about that.
Yeah, some of the guys that I grew up talking to too from the FM Muskies Inc., like Brian Grote, is that name comes to mind the most, is the open water trolling. He's a big troller, and kind of got the word that he's sticking fish out in the middle of nowhere and not even on structure. It's kind of trolling crankbaits, 8-inch believers with like a floral leader with a spoon on the back to attract them, and I mean just all kinds of cool stuff. But yeah, the open water thing, yeah, that was an incredible deal to get in on, especially when it was fresh and new and nobody was really doing it. So, and
Yeah.
we had some pretty sneaky spots where we were getting it done for quite a few years before anyone figured it out. So
Yeah, I still remember, Gus. Do you remember that one day? I don't know if we were out fishing or we were just bobber fishing off the dock. We were younger and we didn't know anything about the bug hatch bite that would go on in Eagle River, and like we saw some guys out fishing in the middle of the lake, and we were kind of like, "What the hell are those guys doing out there?" Like the muskies are all up shallow.
Oh, dude, yeah, and I think looking back at it, two of the particular spots that I think I remember seeing where those people were, we later found out that one, there was like a transition in 12 feet. The lake we're talking about on the Eagle River chain is shallow. In 12 feet, there was just a random sand hump, and I don't know how this person found it. And then there's another one where there was a gravel bar that extended out where we never even thought we would fish this back bay lagoon creek inflow where we're way up, and if our depth finder, as long as our depth finder is reading 4 to 6 feet, we knew we were in the weeds. We knew where the fish were, but we didn't know that there was like an 8, 9 foot gravel flat out there where we haven't caught one off of that one, but we did see one like 2, 3 years ago in mid-June or early June or something like that. But yeah, that is wild. I do remember that. I remember seeing somebody hucking a pounder out there. And I'm like, what the hell are they doing in the middle of the lake? There's only weeds around the lake, not way the hell out there. Our maps don't say that.
Yeah.
Um,
Turns out they knew what they were doing.
turns out they probably did, yeah. So well, that was really fascinating about the open water and night bite. But one thing I do want to ask you about, Mike, is the sand bite that all the Minnesota people kind of rave about, and this is kind of the time of year. Was that that obviously was probably a little bit easier to find out because if they're up in the sand, you actually would physically see them because it sounds like it's pretty clear water. But when that came about, were you pretty astonished that fish could go that shallow? Do they kind of do that over in Detroit Lakes? Do you have the inside weed edge sand or reeds and all that stuff?
yeah, I mean, you kind of took the words out of my mouth when you said the inside edge, and it isn't always sand related. It can be soft bottom related, or just as long as there's an inside weed edge. Fishing some of those spots inside out can be dynamite as soon as the water starts to be on the decline. I'd say low 70s and then dipping, into the high to mid 60s or so. Yeah, it can be pretty dynamite. I've never gotten in on any like real crazy sand bites like the guys used to see out on Mille Lacs. But the fish will still, use the sand and it's just got to be the right conditions. It's not typically your high sky, or usually not a ton of wind either, because it gets real churned up. But it's, low light after dark, right away in the morning, or else, if it's next to a steep break, those fish can slide up on those sand edges, in 2 to 8 feet of water, definitely. And then Lake of the Woods too, catch a lot of fish in the sand, depending on the time of year. But those fish will just relate to just plain pure sand. Sometimes not even weeds.
So
I've been
go ahead.
spending a lot of time up on Lake of the Woods the last, I don't know, probably 5 to 10 years or so. A friend of mine and I, we have a place up there on the Canadian side, and try to get up there as much as possible in July and August and September, and beat on those fish up there. That's, if you were to ask me where my favorite place in the world to fish muskies is, every day I'll tell you Lake of the Woods is my favorite place to be, without a doubt.
You're a good guess, because that's where I was headed next. I was going to ask, when Mike Kramer wants to get away from the Detroit Lakes area, where is he going? It sounds like it's Lake of the Woods.
100% Lake of the Woods. Yep. Yeah. It's pretty special. Those fish are, they're a different breed. I mean, they bite, and they're still muskies, but, you have your tough days and you have your good days, but the good days are really good. And, they bite in the figure eight. They're usually not boat shy. They like bucktails and topwater, and they're just more athletic too than the fish that you see around here. Not that you don't see some angry, fast fish around here, but I don't know. I mean, those Lake of the Woods fish they live in a harsher environment. I think they have a hardier diet, and they just got to be, they're athletes, man. That's what they are. And they're pretty cool. So Lake of the Woods has a special place.
Just in the sense of like closing on baits faster, fighting harder. That's kind of what you're getting at? Just like you said, just more athletic.
Yeah, man. They're pissed. And, if you find them in their right mood, it's pretty awesome. And a lot of fish bite in figure eight up there too. And another thing about Lake of the Woods too is it's probably one of the most patternable bodies of water on the planet. And when I say that, I mean, like, if you catch a fish on a certain spot, usually if you try like spots, there's bound to be some active fish on those things too. And the beauty of Lake of the Woods too is there's just so many different spots to fish in a given day. You can switch it up. I mean, you can fish rocks, sand, cabbage, sunken humps, points, saddles, open water, steep breaks, current areas. I mean, the list goes on and on. And once you start to hit on certain spots, like, tips of points or inside corners or weedy bays or pure sand or whatever, usually you can duplicate, and you can stack a lot of fish up in a hurry, and I don't know, they tend to be a little more bitey up there on the right days for longer periods of time than around here. So
yeah, still haven't done that trip. We've been threatening to do it now for about 3 years, and I don't know, it's just the tournament travels have kind of gotten in the way, and Gus's guiding business has been taken off, so it's just a little bit harder for us to organize a trip. We're really threatening on doing it in 2025. We'll see if it materializes, but it sounds like we really got to get up there and check it out.
you have to, and I'm a huge advocate for Lake of the Woods, Eagle, all the Shield Lakes up that way too, because my baits work really well up there.
I'd imagine. Yeah.
Those fish like loud baits, and they like them moving fast if you want to reel them fast, and they figure eight well. And for whatever reason, those Shield Lake muskies really love Revolution bucktails. They do.
We'll keep that in mind.
Some weed situations up there too, where the woodtick really shines, and it's one of the only baits that you'll get through clean some of that stuff too. So yeah, a lot of the stuff in any of my promo videos is probably half Minnesota and half Lake of the Woods. So it makes for some good action and some good film. That's for sure too. And the scenery is hard to beat even on a bad day. So
Yeah,
So
I think. Go ahead, Brian.
I was just gonna say, even with they have an especially shortened season compared to us in Wisconsin, but is there a time of year you would recommend we go there if we had a choice, or a certain bite that would be most fun for us to get on?
if a guy wants to get in on like the bucktail topwater stuff, I'd say anytime. Typically, it depends on what type of spring you have, of course, but anytime mid to late July, all the way through August into September is kind of bucktail topwater time or crankbaits. And kind of the baits that we all kind of want to throw when we're running and gunning, that type of stuff. When the water temperatures are typically in the upper 60s into, the mid 70s or so, those fish get pretty fired up for stuff like bucktails and topwater. Yeah, I mean, I'm starting to go up there more in the fall now and starting to fish a little differently, back off structure and stuff like that. But if a guy wants to get in on like the real hot action, the shallow water, rock bite, or any of that type of stuff, I'd say July and August is probably the best time.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up our mutual friend here, Jody Marler. How did you get connected with him? I'm guessing through the guiding stuff.
Yeah, so he is a pretty cool dude from Montana. He's a custom home builder.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know the guy from anybody, but he was looking for a potential guide trip western Minnesota. I think he might even specified Detroit Lakes area. And I think one of my friends or somebody recommended, or a few people or whatever recommended him calling me. And he did. And yeah, we've been fishing together for quite some time. We've caught some big fish together. Had some good trips, had some tough times too. But yeah, him and I share a lot of same interests too. I like to bow hunt. He likes to bow hunt, and yeah, we can talk about everything under the sun. And yeah, he's a cool dude, and he's got that fish camp thing going. Some pretty cool, neat videos of all his adventures and stuff like that, and just a salt of the earth guy to hang out with and fish with. I'm lucky to have met him, that's for sure. So
yeah. I mean that's probably pretty cool. Having him film with you and kind of going back and like watching some of that cinematography in your own boat, and I think he does a really good job with that stuff. So I don't know if obviously you've done quite a bit of filming and whatnot in your time, but I'm guessing with him it's probably a little different level of capturing the shots in the moment and all that stuff.
yeah, for sure. We everything I've always filmed has kind of just been GoPro stuff mostly, just to get get the money shot or whatever, the fish eating the bait. But then yeah, having Jody and his camera guy James and whoever he's had with has been, yeah, it's cool. It's cool to capture not just the catch but the essence and kind of the whole I don't know, the whole perspective of everything. And yeah, he's done a good job of doing that. Got some cool videos. So
Yeah,
Was he the
absolutely.
first person that you've been with where like you had like a full film kind of done with you, or have you done anything else?
no, before that, my good friend and a fellow guide too, I mentioned him earlier, Ryan McMahon, he guides in Twin Cities, him and I,
Mhm.
and another cool dude named Nolan Swinghammer, who he does various he's kind of a freelance video guy. He does various stuff. I think he's filmed for a lot of like professional hunting shows and I don't know, fishing stuff like that. So we kind of put some videos together. The three of us put some videos together called the Musky Project. I think those videos are still on YouTube, and those are kind of the same essence of like what Jody's doing. I think there's like maybe 3 videos of Ryan and I, and Nolan filmed it, just doing some cool stuff and fishing muskies and trying to portray the the art of musky fishing and what it's all about and stuff like that. So yeah, that was kind of the first filming stuff that I ever did with that. So
Sweet. I'll have to check those out. I don't know if I've seen him before. I can see Gus is
yeah,
on his laptop looking at him right now.
Oh,
I think
I
if you
am.
if you go on YouTube, there should be the Muskie Project by Swing Hammer Outdoors maybe or something. Are you seeing it?
I got Nolan's swing hammer, just
Yep.
his thing. He's got the Obsession, which looks like a musky thing series. Oh, this is 8, 9 years ago. Would that be
Mhm.
it, or is it?
Yeah, it'd be the Obsession, and then there was a river trip too that he probably has on there that Ryan and I took on my home river
Hmm. It says Flow. That one's just called
flow.
Flow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those two, the Obsession and Flow, those are pretty cool videos. They're a bit ahead of their time. They're awesome. So
Well,
if you
I
got
know what,
time,
Can't wait.
check them out. They're super
yeah,
cool.
I know what I'm doing the rest of the night. Go watch
Nice.
those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Nolan did a good job, and Ryan also putting all that stuff together. I just kind of went with and fished and tried to act like I knew what I was talking about. But
That's perfect.
Hell
The
yeah.
name of the game.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, um, we're definitely looking to get Ryan on this podcast as well. We haven't yet, but when did you meet him? It seems like he's a strong advocate of your lures and catches tons of fish on them, and even in the metro area, which once again is kind of why we took it upon ourselves to use that lure there.
Sure, yeah. So Ryan and I, we go way back to, man, I can't even remember, but originally I think we were going to do the Muskie Expo. Um, the first year I did the Muskie Expo, and the first year he did the Muskie Expo, I think was at the same time. And I think we were Facebook friends. I knew that he was a musky fisherman. And he would come up and fish pelican and stuff like that. And he posted a picture of his banner that he was going to have at the show, and I just shot him a message, and we just kind of started chatting that way, and kind of built our friendship from meeting kind of at the Muskie Expo, and started fishing together when he'd come up to the Pelican area, and um, yeah, I always try to get as many of my baits in his hands because he's always catching fish and guiding a ton, um, and just always does a good job of helping promote and give me feedback on what works and what doesn't. And yeah, just kind of a good connection between him and I. And yeah, um, yeah, he's probably one of my best friends now, I'd say too. So you guys should definitely try to have him on. That's for sure.
Yeah, seems like he knows a thing or two about Minnesota muskies. Have you ever made your way over to Wisconsin before? Done any fishing over in God's country?
So I have fished with John from Lake X,
Okay.
some of the
Hmm.
lakes in his area, Turtle Flambeau, Flowage, some of his sneaky lakes over that way too. And yeah, so I fished there with Johnny a little bit, and then down in the Madison area with a friend of mine by the name of Brad Nelson. He lives down there. He's a pretty good fisherman, and he comes over and fishes in Minnesota and in Canada too. So just basically, that little bit of northern Wisconsin and then some down in the Madison area, but I don't get over that way very much. And
Yeah.
it's 4.5 hours I can be on Lake of the Woods. It's so I live in Minnesota, but it's quicker for me to get to Lake of the Woods than it is Vermilion. Um,
Okay.
and back in the day too, I mean, most of these lakes when they were peaking, are only 40-45 minutes away. So I wasn't fishing many other spots because those were pretty close. But yeah, I don't get over to Wisconsin a ton anymore. I've been meaning to get over to Green Bay to fish with some dudes, but just hasn't happened yet. So
If I were in your shoes at the time, I don't blame you one bit on where you've decided to go. That's for sure. I mean, nothing against our own Wisco greenies, love them to death. But I mean, if you're bagging 50s like that or going to Lake of the Woods and catching a ton of fish, that's that seems like a blast. But yeah, Green Bay is definitely as much as the pressure has kind of pumped up in the last 10 years, it seems like, talking to a lot of people there, it seems like the year classes out there are pretty incredible. Like the the numbers of people catching fish over 54 and 55 inches is actually quite incredible. Maybe they're not having the days that they used to, but the size class is definitely there. And I spent a little bit of time this year out there and got my butt whooped, but I could see one of like your large revolution blades or even a ticker blade doing probably some damage over there. I'm sure there's some people that are pissed at me for saying that, but I think they would definitely catch.
Yeah, been getting a decent amount of reports of guys catching and guys using swim baits too with my blade attachments that I make with a revolution blade on it. So we're putting them
Nice.
in front of swim baits too, and that's kind of been a big deal out there too. But actually too, my old school baits, my window makers with the reflective material, those are still a favorite of a lot of guys that fish at Green Bay, stuff like my eights or nines and my tens and even 12s too with the reflective material. That's still a pretty big bite. I send a lot of baits that way. And still have
Nice.
some pretty big orders for guys in the Green Bay area that love to throw my old school stuff too. So yeah.
So as we're kind of winding down here, how do people get their hands on these baits? What's the best way to do it?
So right now, the best way to do it is through Musky Tackle Online. Usually has a really good stock of stuff. He's a really good online store, takes care of people quick if anyone doesn't know about him. And then I do a ton of direct sales too, just through messaging and things like that, Facebook shop. And we're building a Shopify store, but right now I'm just trying to keep up with the demand that all the other stuff has and try to balance work and life and all those things. And then we do shows as well. And we're working on taking on some of the other dealers that we've had in the past too. But I like to come through on all my orders instead of have people wait for them. So I don't make any promises until I know that I can keep up with the ones that I got. So it's
Sure.
pretty nuts. But yeah, I usually try to be as responsive as possible. If people shoot me a message looking where to get stuff, and Musky Tackle Online is a good place. I just shipped them a ton of baits today. They'll actually be in stock tomorrow.
Make
But
a
they
note
go
of that.
pretty quick. So usually try to ship to them at least once or twice a week. So
Yeah, that is duly noted over here as we are trying to get our hands on quite a few more of them. So
yeah,
Yeah, one's not gonna cut it. That's
yeah,
for
just
sure.
saying. I
It's
was so
got some
nervous
chew
about
marks
losing
on it.
that damn bucktail because that big fish bent it all out of shape and like I was kind of
Put holes
messing
in the
around with
wood.
it, put holes in the wood. I was messing around with it, bending it back, and like I wanted to keep fishing it during pre-fishing because the weather was just so juicy. But I'm like, we can't burn any more fish, and I just feel like this thing is gonna keep getting eaten today. So, like, just out of just trying to be responsible for the tournament, we're just putting it on ice, and we'll pick it up tomorrow morning.
that's a good tactic, man. I mean, if you're on fish, you're on a pattern. You don't want to burn them out before a tournament, that's for sure. So that's
True.
probably a good one.
True. And as far as the guiding goes, what's the rest of the year looking like? If people want to get out with you, what's the best way to do that?
So right now, my September is getting pretty full as well as October, but still have some openings. I'm working on my schedule. If anyone's interested, I'd love to get you out in this area. My live bait stuff, which is really popular, starts to kick in about October 1st or so, depending on. I mean, we'll cast throughout the entire season, but either in Minnesota, one line. So if I got one caster, then the other rod will be a sucker, and that's my rod. But obviously, a customer or guest takes that. But yeah, live bait season typically starts in October and goes till ice up, and the casting bite is really, really kicking in right now with the shallow stuff with bucktails and topwater and all that. So yeah, Minnesota's getting good now. So
No
as soon
doubt.
as we
Well,
transition out of the Lake of the Woods stuff, it usually transitions into a good shallow water bite here in Minnesota nicely. So
Right on. And what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
you can get a hold of me. I mean, you guys give out phone numbers on this too?
Oh yeah.
Sure, if you're willing to, yeah.
Yeah, 701-388-0398 is my cell. And then, anyone can get a hold of me on my Kramer Bros Tackle Facebook business page, or else Mike Kramer on Facebook, or else Kramer Bros Tackle on Instagram as well. So yeah, if anyone's looking for some cool promo videos of some pretty sweet action and they haven't watched any of our stuff, we got some neat stuff on YouTube. So
Okay. Is that just through Kramer Bros like YouTube channel?
yep.
Okay. Sweet. Well, we can't thank you enough for coming on here tonight. You managed to do it between carpool sessions, picking up from got the kids in the car. We don't want to take up too much more of your time. This has been fun. I feel like we could have really gone on about some of that heyday Minnesota stuff. I get really jacked up talking about that because obviously we weren't able to live through it, but man, did it sound like a good time.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me, guys. I'd like to learn more about your guys' thing, and I like what you guys are doing. Kind of, getting more people engaged and trying to keep the sport going, and kind of curtailing to some of the youngsters that like to listen to people talk smart about fishing. And yeah, it's a cool thing. And yeah, if you guys are ever looking for another guest, I'm probably game. So
Cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt about that. Next time we'll come ready with some more Minnesota heyday questions for you, and we'll let you run tonight. But yeah, I can't thank you enough for coming on, and maybe hang on for a second as well. Would love to place some orders.
Yeah, right. For sure. All right, we can't thank Mike Kramer enough for coming on the podcast here and chatting up everything with Kramer Brothers Tackle. A lot of Minnesota talk, a little bit of Lake of the Woods, a lot of heyday of Minnesota, some really cool stuff, a couple tricks he does with his blades that he's made, from his window makers to the Revolution blades to now the wood ticks, the ticking blades, and the invention of all that. Is really, really awesome to have him on and kind of talk about that. We're definitely going to have him on again. We had a blast chatting, and all right, gents. I think we haven't really done this in a while because we haven't had too many guests this summer, really. We've been quite busy, the three of us with fishing and work and all that good stuff. But what are your takeaways on this? Who wants to start?
I can lead us off. Really blew my mind when he was talking about when they first started getting into that open water fishing years ago. It's hard for us to do. I mean, we don't really have a ton of it in Wisconsin, but there's always fish kind of sitting far off the break line, and they feel like open water fish. Even with today's electronics, it feels so foreign to us. It feels a lot of times like a waste of time. And for him to go out there, what did he have at the time they first started doing it? It was just down imaging.
I think you said paper maps, no imaging.
Well, they knew there was bait out there somehow, so maybe they saw bait boiling or something on the surface.
Oh yeah, that's what he said. Tullaby's
yeah.
like breaking the surface, and muskies porpoising like over open water to be like, oh, they're out there, but why?
Yeah, you're really casting into the abyss there. I mean,
Why?
I can't imagine.
Why?
I guess if I was him and I saw a muskie bust on a bait, if I saw a muskie exploding on bait on the surface out over 70 feet, I'd be a little bit more inclined.
You start to get a nervous tick the second you even start to remotely. Second you remotely start seeing the shoreline get a little further from your purview.
Yeah, no. So I mean, hats off to him. They did it. They figured it out, but I can't imagine.
Yeah, seeing that Tullaby go crazy.
It's gonna make you act up, huh? All right.
I'm moving on. Gus, what was your takeaway?
man, I mean, that was kind of part of I mean, one thing was probably as well doing the moon phase stuff. That's kind of honestly, it was sort of something that I really never truly believed in or backed up. It was kind of completely foreign to us. And the fact that they could line that up as well as just in general, like what they did with what they had was quite impressive on catching fish and being able to pattern them based on a moon phase. You'd probably think a lot of people would be like, all right, man, you're crazy. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Moon phase this, like
They
that's all
probably did
hocus
sound nuts
pocus.
back then.
Yeah, it sounded nuts to us not that long. I mean, a decade ago, and now it's totally a thing. I mean, I mean, I definitely believe in it. I wouldn't put all my faith and hope and prayers into it. We've caught our fair share of fish outside of it. Um, you know, the old saying or whatever saying, you get new or old, weather trumps moon is definitely, I would say, takes that factor. But man, yeah, kind of doing that and being like, yeah, this actually works. We should probably fish here. And that's probably, we didn't really get into it specifically, but that's probably what they thought about for night fishing. Because that's another thing that honestly, if you talk to somebody who doesn't fish a lot or doesn't really fish at all, and you say that fish bite at night, they're probably like, "Oh, that doesn't make any sense. How the hell do they see?" But going back and doing that back in the day with the electronics they had, or I should say lack of any electronics for the first part he was talking about, that's pretty crazy. Hooking up boat side on a 50 to 50 whatever inch fish out there, no electronics, pitch dark. You're like, oh shit. On
Yeah.
moonrise or something like that. I don't know, you're figuring all that
Yeah.
stuff out. Pretty cool. But Max, what about you?
Yeah, no, I mean that's what I kind of was alluding to. It's like, oh, you probably feel like a freaking genius when you stumble across a bite like that. What I was trying to say is like the lack of history with it. It's like, we do some of that stuff now, but it's like it's so well documented that it works. So it's a little less crazy for us to follow some of these patterns or moon phase related stuff or open water related stuff because we've heard so much about it. It's just a lot easier for us to go out there and have some confidence doing it. I mean, these guys that are at the forefront of it just always blows my mind. But I always, for me, my biggest takeaway, like every time we talk to guys or gals that have created their own baits, that's always the coolest thing to me to think about. Okay, like musky fishing is extremely hard. Let's make it more difficult by trying to come up with a creation that we did and then catch a musky on it. Like I just got to think that first few times out there with these new baits that he created, catching giant Minnesota fish with them was just such a cool experience. I mean, and even just experiencing some of that a little bit, Gus, with the crazy blade combination that you came up, not invented, but haven't really seen much of it on the market, the last year or two, and catching fish on that is just so cool to be like, oh my God, we might have found a little something, something. I mean, anything to get a little bit of an edge
Hmm.
out on the water. It's just really sweet. So yeah, I mean, I guess takeaway would just be hearing about guys creating their own lures and catching giant fish on them is just always a fun conversation. I'm glad I kept my composure there. I had Brian freaking geeking in the background about his own stuff there off camera, so I had to reel it in real quick here. Yeah, looking at his dumb face. All
Damn.
right. Yeah, no. Saw enough of it this weekend. Just wheeling in pain all weekend from his musky injury. Um,
Yeah,
I was
couldn't
down. I
golf,
took a
couldn't do
knee.
nothing.
Took a knee during the interview. My back was acting up, so I was down on my knees while while we were interviewing him. Heads
That's
bobbing in and out
insane.
of the frame.
oh man. All right, you guys want to chat a little bit about what's going on in the fishing world outside of musky fishing? Some kind of interesting news just broke this week regarding forward-facing sonar, which is a topic that we really haven't talked much about because I guess we probably don't care about it as much as we should. Um, but still,
Yeah.
still find it a little bit interesting, just because it's, in the bass industry, I feel like a lot of that stuff is a lot more mainstream. I mean, just their tournaments, the payouts, the exposure, the following, I guess you could call it, with some of these bass leagues and tournaments, just so much bigger than the muskie industry. And obviously, the year we started fishing the PMTT a little bit, getting our feet wet, was the Eagle River year, where because of that tournament, essentially forward facing sonar was banned.
Yeah.
With, we've actually talked about that in previous podcasts, but it was, essentially the perfect storm of an open water bite aligning with some really active fish and, guys that really were dialed into using forward facing sonar just beat the crap out of fish. I still hold my opinion that if they had caught in 4 or 5 muskies and won the tournament, forward facing sonar still might be around in the PMTT, but I got to give them credit. They acted and they banned it, and they were kind of one of the first, quote unquote professional fishing tours that did it. Now you're starting to see some of these bass leagues either ban it or put a limit on it. So well, that is interesting, because now it's like you take some of the more well-known, fishing tours, and they're kind of capping technology when it was just kind of going on this unchecked rampage of a kind of just a ramp up, if you will. And now it's like they've said, okay, well, they've drawn the line in the sand.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
think,
well,
yeah, you can go to the specifics of it if you want.
no, I mean, I don't have tons other than I was just looking at the page here for the NPFL, the National Professional Fishing League. I believe it's just bass. At least I'm looking at some of the results of tournaments this year. It's just bass, and
Yeah,
they are the
forgive
ones
our
that
ignorance
said,
here.
you're right. Yeah, it's a bunch of musky dudes. So I'm looking here at their homepage, and they're banning forward facing sonar completely starting in the 2025 season. And also BASS that's the one that's going down to 1 unit and up to what 55 inches of screen or something like that. And
55.
yeah, they
Dude, you
need to
should
look at their
see some of those
monitors,
bass
dude.
boats.
God damn.
Exactly, dude. It's pretty nuts. But I know a big thing and a complete like why it's completely different than musky fishing I mean, for a couple of reasons. One, they catch more fish, they catch more than what their bag is because they got the largest bass and they throw back all the small ones, this and that. But it's televised, it's filmed, it's put on YouTube. Musky fishing tournaments, not really the case. And I know the huge thing that I have seen on social media in the past few years is, especially Facebook, is people just don't give a rat's ass about watching these bass tournaments anymore because it's people with their head cocked down, just waiting to cast at a fish, and nobody wants to watch that. Obviously, I've seen some other crap like, when 2D came out, like, oh, well, look at this guy. 2D came out and all he's doing is just staring at his 2D and drop shotting. Um, but I don't know that, forward facing sonar has taken such a big leap in that industry that they've
It,
thought that it was, to their best decision to either ban it or um, bring it down to a certain amount of units. And I've seen this in muskie tournaments and locally as well. A lot of local tournaments actually go down to 1 unit, but
Mhm.
it's local tournaments. They're not really enforced to the degree that bass tournaments kind of are. Not saying it's right to go and cheat and use more than what they say, but that's just kind of the way it is.
I wonder if I mean I'm sure a lot of those BASS guys, running their tournaments are I don't know, 5, 6 live scopes right now. Just kind of fanning in all directions, but I still wonder if it'll be a lot of the same when you're watching it on TV, if they're just sweeping their live stick pull around and just waiting to see a big mark show up, because you can do a lot with just one sonar. And yeah, be curious to see how that unfolds. I don't know if NPFL has like pre-fishing to their tournaments. I'd kind of assume they would, and if they allow us to open that, but not during tournament hours. I don't know if you've seen
Right.
anything on that front.
I can continue reading if anybody wants to step in. I don't see anything yet on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting though, just kind of that it's a little bit more out in the they're making rules, like they're regulating it. I mean, I think this is, you're talking about the mainstream of fishing. They've kind of drawn the line in the sand. Obviously, they've gotten enough pushback. Like these leagues and these, people that are fishing in them certainly are tied to companies that are innovating these products. So it's kind of, that's where I kind of, it piqued my interest of like, well, if you're not, if you're a Garmin or a Humminbird, like if you're not progressing in the technology kind of arms race that we got going on, you're realistically regressing. And if you start looking at these tournaments, all right, saying, hey, we're gonna draw the line in the sand here, and only limit it to this type of unit and this many inches of screen, or completely ban them entirely. I feel like that sends a pretty stern message to these companies of like, stop making them, even though they won't. I mean, they really won't for the average consumer. There's still going to be a market for it, but I don't know. It kind of to me screams like, hey, this is something that actually needs to be addressed. And I still don't really know where I totally align on everything. I mean, I think when it comes to professional, I'm using quote unquotes because I think it's a little bit different when you're paying your way into these tournaments. Like it's hard to consider yourself a professional when you're buying your entry fee. I mean, there's if you look at other professional sports leagues, you have to either qualify for a golf tournament. You have to go to college to play professional football and rise up, the ranks, try out for a team, get selected. But in the professional sports landscape of things, like you see it all over the place. I mean, MLB players, they use wooden bats. They're not using, big aluminum bats. They don't make the fields longer. They just had to regulate the type of bat these pros use. I mean, Brian, we've talked about this in professional golf. I mean, there's a certain length that your driver can be. There's a certain, exit velocity that they're allowed to use for the face of
Head
clubs,
size.
head size. They regulate these things so people aren't driving golf balls 450 yards and kind of making golf courses obsolete. And that's already becoming an issue with the technology they have. And they've talked about rolling the golf ball back for pros because they're starting to hit the ball too far and these courses are becoming, essentially too easy for these pros. Goalie size pads in hockey, like there's a regulation on the size of pads goalies can have, so they're not taking up the whole damn net. So there's all these caps. I think it's probably a good thing that they're figuring out a way to regulate it. I mean, I don't exactly know how that looks in the future if this technology continues to advance, but it's interesting that they've actually formally done something about forward-facing sonar, kind of in the mainstream
Right.
fishing world. So
I'd like to probably do a little bit more research on the old interweb and social medias on the bass thing because I mean obviously there was a for I would say overall just talking with other people, a lot of people are very okay with the PMTT fully banning forward facing sonar. I know we're totally fine with that. We got our one unit. We use it sometimes, not really a ton. I think I think July I might have put it in the boat anywhere between 0 and 1 times. Because we just have mainly fishing a lot more shallow weed edges and shallower lakes and I don't know, just fishing fast and relying more on GPS and side image. But with the bass world, I mean, those guys, that's a huge thing. I mean, they freaking you just look at YouTube and it's just full of live scope this, live scope that, people with giant monitors. Um, what was that one John B video where he's wearing VR glasses and
Yeah.
catching a fish on live scope through that? I mean,
crazy.
that was a tipping point for me. I was like, my God, what the hell am I doing on this? Why am I watching this? This is terrible content. It's- But yet it's got, I don't know, 500,000 views or something ridiculous. So it's being seen by many. And
Yeah.
and a lot of young people too that probably definitely want to do that because it looks cool. So, well, little, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's gonna be kind of that, you know, eventually we're gonna probably be the older guys being like, well, when we started, all we had was side imaging and navionics and 2D and only one live scope that only shot out 40 feet. I mean, like,
Right.
that's kind of what I'm hoping doesn't happen because like that I feel like at that point then we're probably in a very different situation on what fishing actually looks like. Yeah, like I said, I haven't really landed on exactly how I feel about it. Some days I completely think it's stupid and pointless, and other times it's nice to have as a tool in the boat. But I think overall, I mean, the more, we've gone out and fished and less we've used it, the more I realize it just kind of becomes a distraction to some extent anyways. So, um,
Oh, for sure.
yeah. I
No,
don't know.
definitely. I mean, yeah, we've kind of found our in pretty short time of owning it, like our sweet spot of how we like to use it. I mean, when we first got it, we were pretty, you know, intense about bringing it every time and learning how to use it. I mean, it's definitely important. It's not as okay, yes, there is a learning curve. I wouldn't say is as easy as people lead it to be to use it right away, but once you do figure it out and know what you're looking at, it's like, oh, okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense. It's really
And you're
not
kind of just
that
enamored
bad.
by it because you're seeing live fish swimming around on your screen, whether it's a muskie or
Mhm.
not. You're like, oh, well, there's a walleye, squirrel.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it's literally what it feels like. Sometimes you're out on the boat, with even when we have brought it out, the few times we have this year, it's just like you're like, oh, there's a few fish, and you're like, oh man,
hmm
if I only had my walleye rod right now, and it's just like I don't know, it just kind of feels like after a while you're like, what are we doing here? You know?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just I don't know. It hit a few points for me where not to dive too deep in the rabbit hole, but there was a few things where Um, we casted at a couple fish we saw on it and missed it because we were staring at the screen. I did not like that part of it. It's probably led us astray in a few areas where we're just chasing bait for just random reasons, or it's the wrong bait or I don't know, just getting off of the spot and just not fishing it correctly and um what was another I had another thing. My mind just went blank.
No, you're good. I mean, I guess if I could pick it up anywhere, it would be that I'm glad for now that the PMTT doesn't allow it. I think it's great because I do feel like there's a little bit of a sense of if win one of these tournaments or people catch a big fish, it's always like, oh well, they're using live scope. So um,
Yeah,
they're
and you
actually
can't
not that
say
good.
that now, right?
So it's like I kind of appreciate like at least for the PMTT right now to not have it. And um yeah, I do believe, I think whether they allowed 1 unit or 0 units, you'd still see some of the same names up there, but who knows, maybe not. I mean, hard to predict that. But either way, I think it's good to know that if you do have a ban on it and people are out there fishing and catching fish, they're not leaning on it too much as a crutch, even though I don't think it's really helped us out all that much, which is kind of funny to
No,
think.
right. Yeah, and that's the other thing. Like when I first figured, or I guess us together, when we first figured out the tool, at least what I thought, it's just like this is not something I want to lean on. I don't want to be the guy where the screen shuts off and you're like, oh my God, what do I do? Or you go in another big thing now that the PMTT did this. It's kind of nice so that if I'm out there guiding and or just fun fishing and I heavily rely on forward facing sonar and then we go into a tournament and you can't use it, you'd end up fishing completely different and probably feel out of whack. So I feel a little
Mhm.
bit more in sync, like even just pre-fishing. I mean, it's really nice. We still use it. I wouldn't say we use it 100% of the time because then again, I find myself staring at it too much and not casting as much, potentially not moving as many fish. And, you know, majority the thing I was going to add before that I blanked on my mind is a lot of times when we first started using it as well, when it was like you saw all the bait on side image, you know, you knew it was a good spot. It was an inside turn. You had the weed waypoint and then a fish shows up, you know, on the screen. You're like, oh, well, this made sense. Like I don't exactly need the screen to tell me this. I mean, it was just like it made sense that the fish was going to be in this spot, but thank you,
Mhm.
screen, for telling me this. Now I'm going to cast at it and oh shit, I lost it. Or it doesn't move. That's one of two things have happened to us when I see them on the screen. They do nothing or I lose them. So,
Yeah. I also think too, like if you're watching your bait on it, you're working it differently, and it's like, well, if I didn't have it, like, and I was just working it how I had gotten a previous
mhm,
bite that day or something, like maybe that would have been more advantageous to just not even have it in the first place. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's a one of those topics that gets people extremely fired up. So hopefully we're not like tap dancing around it too much, but this is just kind of our like honest opinion from guys that have, use it intermittently. Don't, like I said, it's not something that needs to be in the boat by any stretch of the imagination. If they completely banned it just in general, I doubt they ever will. Like, I don't know, it would be what it would be. It's like not a big doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but people really like talking about it, get fired up talking about it, and hey, I respect that. If you have an opinion and stand by it, that's great.
mhm.
But yeah, I don't know. That's live scope talk.
That's like, yeah, we don't really talk about it too much. Yeah, hopefully we didn't come across too poorly in that sense or whatnot.
Apathetic.
Yeah. But anyways, let's completely switch gears here and see what we got cooking in the Northwoods. It's currently September 4th, Wednesday. This is coming out the next day, and we have another cool down. And the last cool down, the fishing was awesome. As I'm speaking right now, this warm up and high winds before this cool down has sucked. Um, I'm going to predict and, put my money on the table that this weather front and we got some lows in the upper 30s up here in the Eagle River area is going to be very good for fishing. If you're willing to get up early and get on the water and put on some bibs and a jacket, before you got to peel them off because it's still the time of year. If it's 36 in the morning, it might get to 61 and sunny by afternoon. You got to go to a t-shirt and pants. Very worth it, I'd say. This is what the fish want. This is gonna push them shallow and keep them shallow. I mean, what Mike said when he was talking about the shallow water push, and he was saying like the high sun days and where it's super sunny and a little bit warmer and really windy was actually very on par to what it was today. And I went out solo. I was checking out some new stuff and it was not good. Did not find fish shallow and actually didn't even find fish or bait deep either. It just seemed to be a complete off day. Could have been a wrong lake choice, but I was solo and pretty stubborn and really just wanted to learn this lake out. I could have moved and maybe that would have helped. Maybe it didn't even matter, who knows, but I'm excited for this weekend. It's going to be um my first choice in the mornings are probably going to be prop style baits. If I was out solo, honestly, I might even do a flap tail. That was the last top water to get chewed. It did not get a fish in the boat, but I haven't used it much. I kind of reintroduced it again and it got a bite, kind of missed it, came back after it and went away, but I think that could be pretty choice. As well as of course your dive and rise and bucktails. Um, and if they did slide off the break, can't go wrong with a deuce, a dog, or tube. I mean, those are all good recipes. Um, but if you're flying solo, I'd say things that go horizontal, things that spin, things that make noise, and fish shallow. And you should be in good shape. Good time of year. It's fun. Tight bite windows though. That's the unfortunate part. The windows are tightening up. The fish don't follow as much, but when they do, they're usually looking to eat. So be prepared when one does. And water temps are this morning they were like 66 to 67, got up to around 68, 69, 70 when the sun was out. That's probably pretty relatively on par for everywhere. It depends on if you're a calm side of the lake with the sun beating down on it. If it's a dark water system, it's going to heat up way faster, this and that. But um, relatively in that upper 60s, probably into like a 70, 71 maybe at most for northern Wisconsin. But with this cool down, I think everywhere is going to be around 65 to 68. And that's the Northwoods report as of right now.
Sweet. Excited. That'll be the next time I'll be up there is for the championship. So hopefully that weather stays good. But great week ahead of us here, gentlemen. Brian, what's the stretching routine looking like for you here before we sign off to get that back right? We need you feeling good again.
Stretching routine?
Yeah, you're doing yoga. What do you got
Oh,
going on?
no. I have utilized the sauna a couple times since I've been back home. I've
There you
tried to do a
go.
little bit of a core workout. You got to build some stabilizers around that lower back.
Do you think
Um,
that's what it was? Your core is getting a little too
nah,
I don't want
nah,
to use the wrong
nah,
adjective here, a
nah,
little too weak,
nah.
a little too soft.
That can't be it.
A little too
I mean,
soft.
I don't know,
A little
man.
too squishy. No, no. Well, I mean, you know what? If it was, we're gonna change that. All right, that's my
Okay.
wake up
Oh.
call. I'm gonna make some improvements. We've been eating healthy. I mean, I'm just remodeling myself, building back up, building the new. So yeah, I got a chiropractor on Friday morning.
Nice.
We'll see if he can crack it right. Still word is out on if, they know what they're doing or not, but we'll see.
Oh man, did you sleep wrong? Did you like put on like too tight of jeans when you went to bed or something? Or like what happened?
Yeah, it's probably the belt was jamming into my back all night for my jeans.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Must have been uncomfortable, huh?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we're starting to get into we're starting to finally get into the off season. Not totally. This is like the best time here to go musky fishing. But in the near future, when the weather really starts to get cold, we'll be back into the full interview season and also maybe some giveaways where the people that actually stick around and listen to the podcast for this long will be rewarded. So tonight will not be that night, but
Mm-hmm.
stick around here in the future. We got
I was gonna
some,
say I ain't got nothing for
yeah,
that.
we got
Or an
some
idea. I got stuff to give away, but I got no ideas at hand.
no, but we got some potentially new items coming up maybe in the works here for some
merch drop.
merch stuff, some new merch. So we'd
Hmm.
love to hear from you guys what you're looking for, but we got a few things in the pipeline. We'll see what comes to fruition
Maybe
here.
some stocking stuffers as we get closer to that big holiday coming up. If you stock full sweatshirts in your stockings, keep an eye out.
Whoa, whoa.
Yeah, we'll
Nice.
see what
Oh yeah.
happens here, but I don't know, Gus. What else you got? Nothing? Can we go to bed? What's going on here?
All right,
Yeah,
everybody.
we'll keep everybody in the loop on either the podcast here. If you stick to the end, like Max said, that's probably when we do the giveaways to the loyal of listeners. And be sure to follow us at Muskies on Tap on Instagram,
Shut up.
my guide service, Suggs Fishing
Yep.
on Instagram, and Suggs
Shut up.
Fishing Guide Services on Facebook. Add me as a friend, Gus Manty. I
As a
try to
friend.
post here and there. It's usually like a lull, and then all of a sudden I'll blast out like 7 in 7 days. Try my best to keep up. I'm behind by a zillion on fish catches this year. Caught a ton this summer. July was unreal. August was the best August we've ever had for fish numbers and big fish. And September has started out pretty nicely. I've had a little more days off than with the fantasy football and other weekends like that. I fish a lot harder in July, but I'm gonna be fishing very, very hard this September as well. It's gonna be a
Ayo.
lot of fishing some new waters. I'm kind of excited. Probably some solo adventures, so maybe document some of that and and talk about some solo chronicles there. But yeah, and guide webpage is www.sugsfishing.com, SUGS fishing. So with that being said, that brings us to the end here, Brian. If you want to take us away here.
All right, thank you everybody for
Great.
listening to this episode of Muskies on Tap. Shout out to Mike Kramer for coming on this pod. Incredible stuff. Cool to hear his backstory. Give a big shout out to his baits for catching Max and Gus winning the PMTT. And ladies and gentlemen, the Green Bay Packers kicking off Friday night this week. Who do we got? Let's get a quick score check around the horn here. Max, what do you got? Final score.
I got Pack 31, Eagles 17.
Gus?
Ooh. I got Pack 28, Eagles 24.
Ooh, barn
And
burner.
I'll cap things off with a
Don't do
42-17 win for the Green Bay Packers.
There we go. There we
Hey,
go.
he's back.
Hey.
He's back.
Win down there in Brazil, Sao Paulo. And we'll catch you guys next week.
Hey, man. Thoughts and prayers of that back. You love.
Appreciate you.